When any early supposed alien contact story is brought up, it's inevitable that someone will bring up George Adamski. Adamski was a man who to some, on the surface, was doing amazing work for the UFO community, meeting aliens, going on trips with aliens, passing on messages from aliens and discussing alien philosophy. And to others, he was the utter charlatan nightmare, who did more damage to the field of UFOs than 1,000 Rick Doties, or 1,000,000 Paul Bennewitzes. George Adamski was born in Poland, to Polish and Egyptian parents in 1891, and when he was 2, his parents emigrated to Dunkirk, New York State. In 1913, he joined the 13th US Cavalry Regiment, stationed at Columbus, New Mexico. According to his FBI file, he worked in 1916 as a caretaker and painter at Yellowstone National Park, then in 1918 entered the National Guard and was stationed at Portland, Oregon. Following discharge from the Army, his various jobs included working at a flour mill and in the concrete business. His more mysterious story begins in Laguna Beach, in the 1930s, when Adamski founded the so-called Royal Order of Tibet, a neo-theosophical organisation which met in the so-called Temple of Scientific Philosophy. Theosophy was, of course, the notorious occult religion, founded by so-called Madame Helena Blavatsky, a notorious occultist and fraudster. While a lot of Adamski's beliefs did seem derivative of this, he did seem to have some original ideas. He talked of universal progressive Christianity, for example, which I haven't found anyone else speak of, and his ideas were apparently original. Either that or his charisma was key, since a number of his talks were broadcast on radio stations in Los Angeles, and he did seem to be profiting. And that wasn't the only way in which he was profiting. During Prohibition, the temple was given a license to produce wine, for religious purposes, wink wink, but interestingly also ended up selling a ton of it, which seems to have been the source for Adamski's early capital he seems to have put to good use. By the 1940s, he was living on a small ranch near Palomar Mountain, and by 1944, he and his wife had obtained a small parcel of land at the mountain's base, which they developed as a campground, complete with a garden and diner. Adamski also built a small wooden observatory at the campground, where he housed his 6 and 15-inch telescopes. His followers had also begun to call him Professor, despite him having not one bit of formal professorial education. And he was also beginning to make some interesting claims. He often told people he worked at the telescope at Palomar, giving them the false impression he was referring to the telescope at the mountain's peak. And it was actually the small telescopes he'd set up himself, leading to the observatory having to write endless letters to people refuting this, and something Adamski would essentially admit to in one of his books. On October 6, 1946, Adamski and some friends claimed to have seen a large cigar-shaped alien mothership while observing a meteor shower. How exactly they determined it was an alien mothership is anyone's guess, but there you go. Several months later, he claimed to have taken a photo of the same craft, passing in front of the moon, but no record of it turned up. Likewise, by 1947, I'm sure coincidentally, just after Kenneth Arnold's sighting, Adamski was claiming to have seen hundreds of flying saucers in the skies over Palomar Gardens. Interestingly, of course, none of these saucers were noticed by the very advanced telescope technology housed at the top of the mountain, but I'm sure that's purely coincidental too. As the public's interest in UFOs grew, so too did Adamski's notoriety. Just as with his radio shows, his claims led to him getting a number of paid speaking gigs with various organisations in SoCal. In these lectures, Adamski began stating that observatories, such as the one at Palomar, had confirmed that the quote, Martian canals were created by an alien intelligence. He claimed aliens were visiting us, that scientific observation had confirmed intelligent life on every planet in our solar system, and that he was a professor, despite selling hamburgers at his cafe. In May 1950, Adamski presented a photograph to prove his claims. The photo claimed to show 6 spacecraft, flying from the moon, and flying in formation. And much like other potato-quality UFO encrypted photos, all it showed were 6 bright spots, in a rough line, against a dark background, which were too blurry to identify any distinguishing features. However, it did fire into people's imaginations, and a much more detail-rich, flattering rendition of the image was even featured on a postage stamp, in Grenada in 1978. Adamski continued producing photos, but the quality did actually get better, and they were harder to dismiss out of hand. And then, in 1952, his fame truly struck. In November, he and his followers claimed to have seen a large, cylindrical craft hovering nearby. In his book, The Flying Saucers Have Landed, Adamski says he claimed, "Take me down the road, quick. That ship has come looking for me, and I don't want to keep them waiting. Maybe the saucer is already up there somewhere, afraid to come down here, where too many people might see him." Lucy McGinnis, Adamski's secretary, claims she drove him out into the desert, allegedly shadowed by the giant, airborne, submarine-shaped craft. Adamski told her to stop at what he considered the correct spot, and he and a man named Alfred Bailey unloaded his camera gear. He then instructed his companions to return to the others, for fear they would frighten the ship's occupants, but instructed them to watch closely. Shortly thereafter, Adamski claims a quote, beautiful, small craft appeared to be drifting through a saddle between two of the mountain peaks, settling silently into one of the coves at about a half-mile. The ship, appearing to be made of translucent metal, hovered there while Adamski snapped several pictures via a camera mounted to a 6-inch telescope. Quote, quickly I spotted it in the finder on my telescope, and as rapidly as possible I snapped the 7 loaded films, without taking time to focus through the ground glass in the back of the camera. But I was hoping and praying all of the time that Lady Luck was with me and the pictures would turn out well. As I removed each film holder with its exposed negative from the camera, an old Hage Dresden Graffles type, I put it in the right-hand pocket of the jacket I was wearing. Here, I was sure these films would be safe from any accident. I took the camera off and replaced it in the box in which I had brought it. I decided to see then what I could get off with the brownie. As I snapped the first picture, I noticed the saucer flash brightly as it moved away and disappeared over the same saddle through which it had first come, just as a couple of our planes roared overhead. And as you might expect, the entire quality of the photos was complete crap. Regardless of what you think actually happened, Adamski then claimed his attention was suddenly drawn to a figure, standing between 2 low hills, about a quarter-mile away. The figure appeared to motion to Adamski, inviting him closer. As I approached him, a strange feeling came upon me, and I became cautious. At the same time, I looked around to reassure myself that we were in full sight of my companions. Outwardly, there was no reason for this feeling, for the man looked like any other man, and I could see he was somewhat smaller than I, and considerably younger. There were only 2 outstanding differences that I noticed as I neared him. His trousers were not like mine. They were in style, much like ski trousers, and with a passing thought, I wondered why he wore such, out here in the desert. His hair was long, reaching to his shoulders, and was blowing in the wind, as was mine. But this was not too strange, for I have seen a number of men who wore their hair almost that long. Now, for the first time, I finally realized that I was in the presence of a man from space, a human being from another world. I had not seen his ship as I was walking toward him, nor did I look round for it now. I did not even think of his ship, and I was so stunned by this sudden realization that I was speechless. My mind seemed to temporarily stop functioning. Adamski described the man as round-faced, with an extremely high forehead, with skin the colour of an even, medium-coloured suntan. His hair was sand-covered and wavy, and glistened more beautifully than any woman's. He appeared to be wearing some kind of one-piece uniform, shimmery chocolate brown in colour, with a double band of a more golden tone around the waist. His shoes were the colour of oxblood, and although woven, they looked much like leather, and the man somehow conveyed to Adamski that the prints they left were important, as they provided valuable information about interplanetary travel to any traveller who found them in the dirt. After this interestingly intimate description of the beautiful alien man with the swishing hair and body, and a detailed description of how he stared at his trousers from a supposedly heterosexual man, then simping over the incredible boot shoe map, the next several pages describe how Adamski and the alien communicated, using a combination of hand gestures and rudimentary telepathy. He claimed he was able to discern that the visitor came from Venus, and the aliens were here, he said, because they were quite concerned with the nuclear explosions they detected coming from our planet. Not only were they concerned we might accidentally wipe ourselves out, but feared the radiation generated might drift through space and impact their world as well. The contact was partly observed from a distance by 6 friends of Adamski, all of whom signed affidavits claiming it happened, including not just Alice Wells and Lucy McGuinness, but also Alfred and Betty Bailey, and George and Betty Hunt Williamson. Lucy would later claim that, "Here came this great big ship that looked like a dirigible, and George said, 'Quick, get me up there. I want to go and set the telescope up.' So I drove him up to where he said we should go. I kept looking out of the car, and that ship turned and just followed us. And he said, 'Here, stop.' So I stopped, and he got out, and the dirigible stopped, quite a ways away. I couldn't very well judge how far away it was. And he set up the telescope, and after he set everything up, he said, 'Now you go back.' They all did as they were told, and moved back, about a mile or more, because George, interestingly, didn't want them to see what he was doing up close. Regardless, they all claimed they witnessed the incident, and even Lucy admitted, 'It seemed to me like it was a kind of light, but it was so dim, and the sun so bright, that I couldn't be sure. Anyway, I saw it come down. I looked through the binoculars, but they weren't adjusted to my eyes, and I couldn't see for sure.' After this complete lack of binaural corroboration and the utter crap quality of Adamski's photos, none of them were disillusioned, however, nor were Adamski's increasingly growing group of followers, who continued to follow him, even though, curiously, he got no photos of Orthon, as the Venusian alien called himself. Adamski remembered, "I am sure that he understood my desire, since he was so good at reading my mind. Also, I am positive he knew I would do him no harm, because he showed no signs of fear when I picked up the Kodak. Nevertheless, he did object to having his picture taken." Oh, I'm sure he understood your desire all right, George. But, despite this completely zilch evidence, Adamski did say he communicated extensively with Orthon, including about death. "I wanted to know if they die, as Earthmen die. He pointed to his body and nodded in the affirmative, the bodies do die. But pointing to his head, which I assumed to mean his mind, or intelligence, he shook his head in negation. This does not die. And with a motion of his hand, he gave me the impression that this, the intelligence, goes on evolving. Then he pointed to himself. He indicated that he once lived here on Earth. Then pointing up to space, now he is living out there." Orthon then motioned for Adamski to follow him, and they both walked toward the waiting craft. "It was a beautiful small craft," said Adamski, "shaped more like a heavy glass barrel than a saucer. Yet I could not see through it, though it was translucent and of exquisite colour." A request by Adamski to ride on the ship, wouldn't you know, was politely turned down. Then Orthon entered the craft, some kind of strange inner rings and outer rings began to swirl, and off it went, with military aircraft allegedly circling overhead. Afterward, Lucy remembered that Adamski seemed utterly elated, but she couldn't actually tell what happened, because, quote, "you couldn't see very much detail that far away, and they were, quote, far away enough to look like fence posts." Yeah, fence posts. Still, she saw the footprints, and she didn't have any suspicions, even though others did. Some, such as Sergeant Gerald Baker, noted that Adamski seemed to have put everyone at a suspicious distance, as if he'd planned everything out, have Plaster of Paris with him to take footprints, to have brought along a whole lot of people, and to know where to go. Baker claims he also came across a tape recording of a, quote, "psychic communication" received through Adamski, which seemed to indicate the whole thing was a, quote, "planned operation." Regardless, Adamski continued to claim contact with aliens, and claimed he received some more success. Because Orthon allegedly had one of his photographic plates, and promised to return it, Adamski kept himself in a state of constant alertness. With the plate camera attached, he set up his telescope at a spot on the Palomar Gardens property, giving an unobstructed view of the far distance, and on the morning of December 13, 1952, he claims he was alerted by the roar of jets overhead. In the distance, he saw a flash, and remarked to others that it might be a spacecraft. "Sure enough," he reported, "I was able to observe it, gliding noiselessly in my direction, an iridescent glass-like craft, flashing its brilliant colours in the morning sun." As it came over the nearby valley, it seemed to stop and hover motionlessly, and quickly he got 2 shots. Then, realising being that near was too large to get the whole thing in the picture, he turned the camera on the eyepiece, and took another shot while it was still hovering, then shot the 4th picture, just as the ship was beginning to move again, with the 4th picture turning out fuzzy. Adamski claimed that then, "as it approached, probably within 100 feet of me, and to one side, one of the portholes opened slightly, a hand was extended, and the self-same holder which my spaceman friend had carried away with him on November 20 was dropped to the ground. As the holder was released, the hand appeared to wave slightly, just before the craft passed beyond me. I watched the holder drop and strike a rock as it hit the ground." Adamski picked up the holder, dented from its impact with the rock, and wrapped it in his handkerchief, so as not to damage any potentially important evidence. Meanwhile, the craft crossed a small ravine, near the Palomar Gardens property, as it moved toward the base of the mountains, to the north. Then, dropping below the level of the treetops, it flew close to a cabin, where it was allegedly seen by some other witnesses, and photographed by one of Adamski's followers. And the photo is curiously blurry, and the follower claims he never took it. Regardless, Adamski then met with the FBI and OSI, and claimed they'd cleared his findings and declared them legitimate. Only for the FBI and Office of Naval Intelligence to rebuke him, when during a speech before the Corona, California Lions Club on March 12, 1953, Adamski boasted his material had been, quote, "cleared" by the FBI and OSI, allegedly supporting this extravagant claim with a doctored copy of a paper, signed by FBI and Air Force agents. For this gross misrepresentation, Adamski was visited by FBI agents from San Diego, and soundly admonished. Even FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, not exactly a paragon of virtue, wrote, "At the time of the interview, Mr. Adamski denied making the statement. In the agent's presence, he wrote a letter to the editor of the Riverside Enterprise, pointing out the incorrectness of the article with respect to FBI and Air Force intelligence clearance of his material. And then we get to Adamski's famous photos, most of which are universally thought to be fake. When a photographic expert examined the famous December 1952 photo, he said it wasn't a flying saucer at all. It was the top of a machine used in the poultry industry, to keep baby chicks warm. The saucer's exposed, quote, landing gears were actually light bulbs. And trust me, as an ex-chicken farmer and lover of chickens, it's a chicken light. I can go out into the garden right now and show it to Ethel, and she'll cluck in the affirmative. Nevertheless, Adamski began to do very well from this. In addition to selling hundreds of thousands of copies of his book, Inside the Flying Saucers, and numerous other books, as well as prints of the flying saucer photos, Adamski charged money to give lectures on his adventures with the Venusians, and began discussing Venusian philosophy. Eventually, he had a paid staff, and took vacations in Mexico, all aided by his admittedly formidable charisma. But of course, this could not go on forever, in part because Adamski's claims began to get increasingly absurd. In his second book, Inside the Spaceships, he describes how, on February 18 of 1953, two men approached him at a hotel in Los Angeles. I noticed that both men were well proportioned. One was slightly over 6 feet and looked to be in his early 30s. His complexion was ruddy, his eyes dark brown, with the kind of sparkle that suggests great enjoyment of life. His gaze was extraordinarily penetrating. His black hair waved and was cut according to our style. He wore a dark brown business suit. The short man looked younger, and I judged his height to be about 5 feet 9 inches. He had a round, boyish face, a fair complexion, and eyes of a greyish blue. His hair, also wavy and worn in our style, was sandy in colour. He was dressed in a grey suit and was also hatless. He smiled as he addressed me by name. As I acknowledged the greeting, the speaker extended his hand, and when it touched mine, a great joy filled me. The signal was the same as had been given by the man I had met in the desert. Consequently, I knew these men were not inhabitants of Earth. After yet another interesting depiction of sparkly-eyed, wavy-haired aliens penetrating him and giving his heterosexual self tingles, Adamski finished his space simping and accepted a visit to accompany them, and was taken in a black Pontiac sedan to a destination some way out of Los Angeles. During the journey, the strangers introduced themselves as coming from Mars and Saturn. Adamski asked himself how they managed to speak English so well. To this unspoken thought, one of the men responded, "We are what you on Earth might call contact men. We live and work here. We have lived on your planet now for several years. At first, we did have a slight accent, but that has been overcome, and, as you can see, we are unrecognized as other Earthmen." All this talk, as you could imagine, was starting to make people question him, especially because he then described the space visitors, as well as driving sedans, visiting Los Angeles hotels and speaking without accents, flying him 50,000 miles into space. I was amazed to see that the background of space is totally dark, yet there were manifestations taking place all around us, as though billions upon billions of fireflies were flickering everywhere, moving in all directions, as fireflies do. However, these were of many colours, a gigantic celestial fireworks display that was beautiful to the point of being awesome. In all fairness, one astronaut who has been into space did give a similar telling. John Glenn, orbiting the Earth in the Mercury 6 space capsule, described, quote, "A lot of little things that I thought were stars were actually a bright yellowish green, about the size and intensity as looking at a firefly on a real dark night. There were literally thousands of them." But, of course, all this was spoiled when Adamski described, on another flight, seeing the surface of the moon. True, some of the craters have been formed by meteorites, hitting the moon's surface, but in every such case, these craters show definite funnel bottoms. And as I studied the magnified surface of the moon upon the screen before us, I noticed deep ruts in the ground and in some of the embedded rock, which could have been made in no other way than a heavy runoff of water in times past. In some of these pictures, there was still a very small growth of vegetation perceptible. Part of the surface looked fine and powdery, while other portions appeared to consist of larger particles, similar to coarse sand or fine gravel. He even described seeing a small four-legged animal, as well as a temperate section around the equator, with snow-capped mountains, forests, lakes, and even a fair-sized city where human beings could live comfortably. Now, in defense of his claims, Desmond Leslie has pointed out that several photographs taken by the Apollo 8 crew show pronounced greenish hues on the lunar surface, giving the impression that one is looking at high-altitude forests. One picture shows what looks like a beautiful blue lake. If the best cameras on Earth recorded the moon in this way, Leslie argued, Adamski can be forgiven for falling victim to a, quote, optical illusion. The problem was that to many, as his claims got more and more fantastic, he was seen as falling victim to clear delusions, or just outright lying. During his alleged flight into space, in August 1954, Adamski described how holographic projections from the planet Venus were shown to him. "We have a certain type of projector that can send out and stop beams at any distance desired," explained Orthan. "The stopping point serves as an invisible screen, where the pictures are concentrated with colour and dimensional qualities intact." Adamski described magnificent mountains, some topped with snow, some quite barren and rocky, and some thickly timbered. "We have many lakes and seven oceans," said Orthan, "all of which are connected by waterways, both natural and artificial." Several Venusian cities were shown, with people going about their business. Conveyances, varying in size and pattern somewhat after the motherships, appeared to be gliding along just above the ground. This was after Venus was known to be a gaseous boiling nightmare, and people were beginning to get a little suspicious of Adamski. In 1961, he claimed to have made an actual trip to Venus, and spent 5 hours there, claiming, "The day was warm, with the sun shining brightly through a scattering of mackerel cloud. The air was fresh and clean smelling. I was told it had rained the day before. While I had done a little walking, I noticed myself fatiguing. The atmospheric pressure on Venus, in the vicinity I was, could therefore be compared to that of Earth's atmospheric pressure, at the altitude, and in a considerable location with Mexico City. On Venus, as on Earth, 80% of the planet is covered with water. The cloud cover that does not permit us to see the surface of Venus is caused by the constant evaporation of moisture. This permits a large tropical area where fruits and vegetables are plentiful. There are seasons when the rainfall is very heavy, and in some sections, a light rain falls each day." Moreover, Adamski was told that in the rotation period of Venus, it's 23 hours, whereas in fact it's 243 days. And then he went further, describing his trip to Saturn, his trip to the 12 councillors meeting of our solar system, a spaceship coming into a government airbase, where a high official of the US government had a conference with the crew, then the ship, taking 9 hours, and travelling at 200 million miles an hour, returned home. And at greater than 200 million miles an hour, it became obvious Adamski was lying. In October 1962, a silly letter was written to his workers, with transparently fake alien symbols added, saying, "You are doing good work. George Adamski is the only one on Earth that we support." And this was the final straw for many of them. Adamski himself is pulling down his original image, noted Roy Russell, an Australian follower. It was also noted that Adamski's 1964 Science of Life study course, which he claimed contained information and philosophy from the Space Brothers, was in fact a rewrite of his first book, Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East, published in 1936 by the Royal Order of Tibet. Even worse, former so-called contactee, Ray Stanford, claims that in 1958, as a devoted 15-year-old follower of Adamski, he was visiting Palomar Terraces with his brother Rex, when Adamski started reminiscing. "During the Prohibition, I had the Order of Tibet. It was a front. Listen, I was able to make the wine. You know, we're supposed to have the religious ceremonies. We make the wine for them, and the authorities can't interfere with our religion. Hell, I made enough wine for half of Southern California. In fact, boys, I was the biggest bootlegger around. If it hadn't been for that man Roosevelt, I wouldn't have had to get into all this saucer crap." In 1958, Adamski is reported to have made another statement to Ray Stanford too. "Ray, listen," he said. "I did not ever have to go out into space to know about the spaceships. Hell, I knew about the spaceships and what was in them years ago. Pioneers of space will tell you everything, just like inside the spaceships. All I did was project my consciousness to the beings out there, and could see them and know what was in their ships." Indeed, by 1965, among many, Adamski was widely seen as a fraud, with his forged letters, forged Mars, forged Venus, and almost certainly forged hot aliens, as well as his verbally gooning about said hot aliens to anyone who would listen. He died in that same year, just as his star was seriously beginning to wane. But before it waned, it was amazing just how few people saw the Emperor had no clothes, and how some real emperors paid tribute to him. Following the success of his books, Adamski became a celebrity. He was invited all over the world to lecture, as well as to meet many prominent people. In 1959, he was invited by Queen Juliana of the Netherlands to The Hague. That meeting, which took place on May 18, was attended by dignitaries and experts, including Prince Bernhard, Lieutenant General H. Sharper, Chief of the Royal Netherlands Air Force, and Professor Jongbloed, an expert in aviation medicine. Going well over its 45-minute allotted time, the meeting lasted 2 hours. Furthermore, Carol Honey, an aerospace engineer who was Adamski's right-hand man for years and became sceptical of him, claimed he was present on several occasions, where Adamski was visited by various government and military officials. And furthermore, Adamski even claimed to have had a private meeting at the Vatican with the ill Pope John to deliver an important message, which he said had been given to him by one of the space people in Copenhagen. This claim has been roundly denounced, but circumstantial evidence suggests it did indeed take place. Expected to be at a certain entrance at 11, Adamski was accompanied, as far as the steps of St. Peter's, by co-workers May Mortlett and Louise Zinstag. Louise remembered, "May and I got in there in good time. We walked slowly, up to the broad central stairway, looking around us. Within a few minutes, George cried out, 'There he is! I can see the man! Please wait for me here, in about an hour's time.' He descended the steps swiftly, turning to the left. I had looked to the right, because I expected him to be admitted through the well-known gate, where the Swiss guards were posted. Yet, without any hesitation, he walked to the left of the dome, where I now noticed a high wooden entrance gate, behind the open doorway, with a small built-in door. This door was partially opened, and a man was standing inside it, gesturing directly to George. He wore a black suit, but not a priest's robe. On his chest, I noticed some kind of coloured material, in white, green and red. May and I returned an hour later. There was George already, grinning like a monkey. I shall never forget his face. I never saw his face as happy as that, his eyes shining like beautiful topazes, something I shall never forget. 'We have done it,' he said. 'I was received by the Pope. He gave me his blessing, and I gave him the message.' So that is the life of George Adamski, at times fascinating, at times frustrating, at times utterly infuriating, and I haven't even mentioned how he showed off a papal coin, allegedly not even released at the time, as proof of his visit, how he allegedly met Kennedy, how he spent 2 hours with the Queen of the Netherlands talking about UFOs and other things. But what a life. Even if all his claims are false, and they almost certainly are, the man himself didn't even need to lie to make his story more fascinating. He was a novel writer, space schooner, California's biggest bootlegger, sold concrete, sold hamburgers while setting up a telescope, sold hamburgers while using the smaller telescope to represent the bigger telescope on the hill. The man's life was fascinating, and he undoubtedly had incredible charisma. One source remembers he once ate a posh 4 to 5 course dinner with all these different kinds of silver cutlery, knew exactly what to do with each piece, and could dine like a gentleman, on top of all his charisma and lecturing. Unlike most liars, I don't think he lied because he had no inner world. In fact, I think he had too much inner world, so much so that he projected his fantasies onto the rest of it, but did it mainly because he was a grifter, and out to make money. Otherwise this, quote, saucer crap would have been no interest to him. But it's certainly of interest to us. But what do you think of George Adamski? Liar, charlatan, fraud or something else? I find it especially interesting how one of his followers said the ship that followed them looked like a, quote, airship, how she definitely saw what looked like people in the distance. Adamski seemed to have all these strange stories that were backed up by small circumstantial things. He mentioned things like the government allegedly covering up aliens. He mentioned things like pressure on other planets that weren't hugely known at the time. Was he some kind of CIA disinformation plant? It's well known that the government was using UFOs to disguise top secret projects, especially around 1947. Was he somehow some kind of disinformation conduit? Was he a grifter and a disinformation conduit? Please, let me know what you think in the comments section, and please subscribe, hit the bell notification button, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you for listening to another episode of Saucercast.